So this is going to feel a little bit like a throwback to 2013 or so. We got a clip here of Glenn Beck. He still thinks he's relevant, and he was invited to CPAC, which is the gathering of, far-right people. And he gave a speech, and we can sum it up by saying the following. Inequality is awesome. That's his philosophy, but, I don't need to explain it. He'll explain it in his own words, and then we'll discuss.
A lot of people think that democratic socialism is just a new coat of paint on the old FDR democratic policies. But let me give you a quote from a Vox column. The title, Democratic Socialism Explained by a Democratic Socialist. The author writes, quote, "There's truth in the long run. Democratic socialists want to end capitalism." Ma'am, we've traced the call. It's coming from inside the House and the Senate. From the column, quote, "Many observers see groups like DSA pushing for policies like Medicare for all and decide that we must actually be something like New Deal liberals who are simply confused about the meaning of socialism. But that's not true. Medicare for all is an instructive example. Medicare for all is not socialism. That would just only nationalize the insurance, not the whole healthcare system. But democratic socialists," still quoting, "ultimately want something more like the British National Health Service. So why aren't they going for that?" Well, we could ask ourselves, why weren't they going for Medicare for all when we were talking about Obamacare? Again, quoting, "Because we currently don't have the support to push for and win such an ambitious program. Social democratic reforms like Medicare for all, in the eyes of DSA, part of the long, uneven process of building that support and eventually overthrowing capitalism," end quote. This is the philosophy of the candidates the Democrats are now saying are the future of the party and the future of America. Today, we must dismiss two fallacies. The first one is that capitalism doesn't work. The second is that socialism doesn't work. Let me be the first to tell you that socialism does indeed work. In fact, it works perfectly as designed every single time. We have been having this debate for 170 years now. We look at socialism and say, look, it doesn't work. Look at all the poor and the starving people. Look at all of the piles of dead bodies. And they say, capitalism doesn't work. Look at all the fat rich people. Look at all of the inequality. Well, yes, we have to look at the goals of both. The goal of socialism is equality for all, the equality of outcome. So the goal of socialism is that, then the goal of capitalism being the opposite must be the opposite, inequality of outcome. Yes, the precise and natural result of the free market. Capitalism is the inequality of outcomes. Or to put it another way, capitalism acknowledges and encourages merit. You cannot have merit without inequality. If you want to get rid of inequality, you must first get rid of merit. But capitalism safeguards the promise and hope of inequality. This is why we all studied in school, why we worked so hard to get an A. Because we knew if we had an A, even if others had a D or an F, what it meant for us was the promise of bettering our own lives and our own prospects. It's why we worked hard. It's why many of us get up every morning, why we strive to create or invent, not just to better our world, but to better ourselves and our station. That is the promise and the hope of inequality.
So that's great. I like how his description here of the respective economic and political systems are laid out in a way where he's saying inequality is wonderful. So let's break this down further. Let's talk about how he's sloppy with his terms and his definitions and his understanding of the way these respective systems work. So at the beginning he talks about how, well, no, democratic socialists do want to end capitalism. That's his point. He's using a Vox article to buttress his point. But here's the thing. Yeah, Vox had an article where a democratic socialist spoke about how him or her, that particular democratic socialist, was like, I would like to get past capitalism, overthrow capitalism, whatever. But the democratic socialists, or really social democrats, who are elected in Congress, and, Bernie Sanders in the Senate, they're crystal clear that that's actually not their goal. They're crystal clear that what they want is a Scandinavian-type system, which harnesses both capitalism and socialism, takes the best aspects of both, has a mixed market economy, and basically just tries to foster equal opportunity. So basically he's trying to frame the argument in a way that's most convenient to his ideology. And what he's trying to say is, yeah, but these democratic socialists actually are all post-capitalist, which is why they're such a problem and why we need to fight back against it. But that's totally misleading and not true, because all the so-called democratic socialists who are elected have explained repeatedly that when they use the term democratic socialist, what they really mean is social democracy. And he even mentions New Deal liberals as a counterpoint to these democratic socialists. But actually, no. New Deal liberalism is actually the heart of the so-called democratic socialism of Bernie Sanders, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, so on and so forth. So it's misleading. At best, it's a half-truth. Are there some democratic socialists who want to be post-capitalist? Sure, there's some. But all the elected ones don't. And I would argue probably the bulk of the movement is more of a social democratic movement, because it's all based on the principles of Medicare for all, free college, living wage, and the wars, and things of that nature, which that policy platform, when you go through it, it's all social democratic. I haven't seen almost anybody who says, no, my whole point is being post-capitalist, and here's my detailed plan as to how we get to that point. Never heard it. And I run in left circles, never heard it. I'm sure some people have that point, but no tangible plan has been explained. The furthest I've heard anybody go is the idea of worker-owned co-ops being the norm. And that doesn't even scare me that much. I mean, I like the idea of allowing for worker-owned co-ops, but not necessarily banning the old-school traditional hierarchy of a business. So perhaps I'm a little further right-wing than the people who would say, I want worker-owned co-ops to be the norm. But even those people, that's not this scary type of post-capitalism, uncharted world that he wants us to be afraid of. That actually seems like a totally normal, reasonable system that would function relatively fine. So then he goes on to talk about how, well, why don't they say they're for a UK-style system? Again, because there's actually mixed feelings on the left on this issue. Some people, I've always said, I'll take any kind of single-payer system that we can get. So if that means a French-style system where we have public funding going to private institutions, so you have the single insurer, but the providers are private, totally fine with that. I'll take it in a heartbeat. Or if we have the UK-style system where it's public funding going to public institutions, I'll take that too. Either one's fine. So when he makes it seem like, oh, they don't have the support for the UK-style system, that's not true. When you talk about Medicare for all, it polls at 70%. And obviously, the wording will change the amount of support generally. But I'm pretty sure if you phrase it as, do you want a single-payer system? Do you want a nationalized healthcare system as a right? People will say yeah to that. So it's not even true that, people would be so scared of the UK system. In a lot of these studies on the best healthcare systems in the world, the UK comes out number one. So there's an argument that maybe even that UK system, public funding of public institutions, is even better than the French system, which is public funding of private institutions. But there's other studies where France comes out number one. So I don't know. I don't care. I think the main component is the funding has to be public funding. But I like how he's trying to fearmonger over something that's wildly popular, and he's pretending like it's not popular. Then we get to the meat of the argument. Capitalism works because capitalism leads to inequality, and inequality is awesome. Okay, but Glenn, you're being sloppy here. The point is, what level of inequality is okay and acceptable and makes sense? Now, I would argue, does some inequality make sense? Absolutely. There should be a certain level of inequality because it actually is true that some people work much, much harder than other people. It is true that there's a lot more responsibility being, the CEO of a giant company versus, I don't know, somebody who gets coffee and straightens up a little bit. Like, there is a difference there. And I think even the most committed leftist will tell you, yeah, I'm not saying that they should both make $1 million a year here, or 200 grand a year, whatever the fucking number may be, 80 grand a year, whatever. So again, what these guys love to do is set up a straw man of the opponent and then knock down that straw man. But in this case, he's just being sloppy with his terms. So he's saying capitalism works because it leads to inequality, and inequality is awesome. Well, the degree of inequality we have, Glenn, is not even close to awesome. In fact, it's comically dumb. And I would argue you can make a moral argument about why it's terrible, but I think you could actually just make a logical argument as to why it makes absolutely no sense, even divorcing it from morality completely. So in other words, the Walton family, 6 people have more wealth than the bottom 45% of the country combined. Now, the Walton family, for those of you who don't know, the person who created Walmart is no longer alive. So the Walton family is just a bunch of moocher babies who were part of the Good Sperm Club, and they got lucky. Okay, so Glenn Beck's argument is, capitalism works because it leads to inequality, and inequality is awesome. But hold on, that level of inequality is preposterous, and also, they didn't work for it. So you're undermining your other point about merit. And again, this gets to the core of the argument. The thing that's great about capitalism is that it incentivizes merit, and so the harder you work, the further you go. That's his point. That is unequivocally not true. 60% of wealth in this country is intergenerational and passed down. So 60% of these people who are at the top, who are fantastically wealthy, it's inherited money. It's generational wealth. So that is the polar opposite of this idea of merit, like, everybody who's rich work for it. Not even close to true. And then the flip side of that is also the case. So I know people who are the hardest working people I've ever met. Some of them work 3 jobs, still living probably at the poverty line, right about at the poverty line, or barely paying their bills, definitely living paycheck to paycheck. 76% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Now, Glenn, if you're being consistent in your point here, what you would say is, well, listen, that's 76% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. Tough cookies, work harder. You're not working hard enough. And my response to you is, you're a fucking idiot if you really think that's true. Most of those people are the hardest working people in the country, and their work is just not valued properly. And that's why you need rules, and that's why you need regulations, and that's why it makes sense to have a system that's crafted in a way that's fair to working people. And then, of course, he says the goal of socialism is equality of outcome. Again, I run in left circles. Maybe there's some people who say that, but I haven't encountered them. Most of the people, at least who agree with my school of thought, which is social democracy, the argument is, no, we actually are the real proponents of equality of opportunity. So what that means is you're not really given a fair shot in this world if you don't have, a roof over your head, you don't have health care, you don't have the ability for higher education, which then studies show, of course, that leads to more opportunities in your life, and you can make more money as well if you go down that path. So that's why we fight for things like a living wage. That's why we fight for things like union access so that people's work can be valued properly, where if you're a working class person, you can have a decent middle class life. The policies that we fight for, Medicare for all, free college, living wage, things of that nature, the whole point of those policies is to make it so that you give people a fair shot and equal opportunity, not equal outcome. Again, equal outcome would mean everybody makes the same, no matter how hard you work. I haven't met anybody who argues for that. Anybody. But see, that's how he tries to portray the left. He tries to portray the left as thinking that everybody should make the same no matter how hard they work, and my goal is equality of outcome, bro. Except you just made that up, and you're creating a straw lefty to knock it down. Now, again, maybe there's a handful of people who believe that, and they even have a decent case they can make for it. I haven't heard those people. I haven't seen those people. So I'm not going to go on the acting assumption that Glenn Beck knows the left better than I do when I'm part of the left, and I know what everybody in my circles says. And, my whole point is we want to get to the point where we actually have equal opportunity. And right now we don't have that. And when you have a $1.5 trillion in student loan debt, that's unsustainable and unfair. And people start behind the eight ball. When you have a minimum wage that's not a living wage, that's not fair. That's not giving people equal opportunity. If they work hard, they should make enough money to survive. When you have half of workers in this country making $30,000 or less, that's not equal opportunity for these people. So I would argue we're actually trying to create more of a meritocracy. And, he's deluded when he thinks like, oh, capitalism is great because it has inequality and inequality is awesome. It's the degree, it's the level of inequality. And then also in our system, which is corporatism, people fail up all the time. Trump failed up his entire life. Wall Street crashed the fucking economy, made horrendous decisions, hosed their clients like Goldman Sachs did, committing fraud, totally got away with it. Multi-trillion-dollar bank bailouts to the people who crashed the economy for greed. And, they got bonuses with tax money. So that's not like the idea that this system, like, oh, that's great because it rewards the right people. Are you kidding me? What a joke. What a joke that is. It's a broken system. It's a corrupt system. And the fact that you don't acknowledge that means you're a status quo defender, which means you're deeply, deeply unintellectual.